Today, I'm preaching a sermon, the opening sermon, which is kind of fun. That's kind of fun. I'm opening the thing, first fruits. And it's about blind spots. And Lindsay did an incredible job of describing what it is that we all have blind spots. And we need to bring others into those areas. But the problem is that we don't recognize we have blind spots. You notice in our culture today, the biggest problem is not money, but it's relational deficits. I looked it up today and noticed that I knew there was about 6,014 wars that are happening all over the world right now. And it's interesting, majority of those wars are not because they're wars between people that don't actually know each other. It's actually people that are of same bloodlines, same ethnicities and so forth, so on. They're tribal in some extent. It's the reason being is because of a relational conflict, and that usually turns into bloodshed. And we see that biblically with Cain and Abel. That's the consequence of sin, is that when there is a separation, when there's a relational deficit, then there's damage. Currently, right now in our world, there's only 11 countries that are not currently in conflict. And so the issue is this, is that why is it? That there is this thing that exists between us and also between God. And Jesus came to literally break that down. That wall of hostility that exists between us and God and also each other. And this is something that we need God to speak into. And so my hope this morning is that you would understand that there are relational deficits and that there are blind spots in your life. But it's okay. It's okay. Don't get condemned. Don't get worked up. Because it's the byproduct of what? The fall. You see, when God originally designed us, when Adam and Eve were created, he created them, they were created out of relationship for relationship. It's funny. Adam is created in perfection, yet God says this to Adam. He says, it's not good for man to be alone. So if you currently have this paradigm, this understanding that you're okay alone, then you're in deception. It is not good for any person to be alone. We need each other. We, in many ways, complete each other. This is why he decided to create Eve, and Eve was created out of Adam. Not from the dust of the ground, but actually out of his rib. There's a reason for that, because he wants to know that this is what we are. We're a body. We're interconnected. We're interdependent to each other. And this is the idea in our culture that this I can do life by myself. Technology affords us. It makes us think, though, but that is a lie. We can't do life alone. God wants to bless you, and the blessings of God come through relationship. But this is the struggle for all of us, is that we all desire to see things completely. How many want that? I'm constantly looking for perfection. I'm constantly looking for knowledge and aspiring. And I'm thinking, man, if I do this and this and this, I'll get it. But the reality is that things seem to always be incomplete in life. And there's a reason for this, is that in Genesis, you read the story, and God says to Adam, and he says, dude, you can eat of anything. You can partake of anything you like, but you cannot eat of this fruit. And this tree is the tree of good and knowledge. And God essentially is saying this to Adam. He's saying, you cannot handle this tree. You cannot handle being God. But because of deception and a lie, Eve ends up partaking and then gives it to Adam, and then they end up coming into the knowledge, basically, of trying to be God. And this is why God had to kick them out of the garden. There can't be two gods in the Garden of Eden, only one God. And so God had to literally begin to start the process and the plan of bringing right order. And since the fall, there's always been this struggle for us always wanting to have things completely. But what I want to encourage you this morning is, if there's deficiency in your life, it's okay. That's how you were created. Let's read 1 Corinthians 13:12 in the NLT. It says, now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete. But then I will know everything completely, just as God knows me completely. This is what the whole thing is. This is exciting. God knows you completely, but you don't know God completely. This idea that we know God completely, we don't. There's aspects of God that are revealed to us, because if we knew God completely, guess what? We'd all be in heaven right now. But one day, when we're in our glorified body, we will know everything completely. One day you will look back and you'll say, oh, I get it. There are things right now in your life that do not make sense. You don't know, and you're working at it, and you're trying to make sense of it. And what God is saying this, that it's fine. It's okay. There are areas that, this is so many people, this is what they do. They're trying to bring understanding in areas where they don't have capacity to bring understanding. So, what is this incompleteness? I would call it the blind spot. Let's define the blind spot. What is the blind spot? Well, I looked this up for you guys, and the physiological blind spot is the place in the visual field that corresponds to the lack of light detecting photoreceptor cells on the optic disc of the retina where the optic nerve passes through it. Since there are no cells to detect light on the optic disc, a part of the field of vision is not perceived. This is really interesting. So, I was thinking about this. Is this the consequence of the fall that we don't have perfect vision, or is it that God created us purposely like that? I think God created us that way on purpose, because he knew that we needed each other. And so what it's saying is that there's certain areas in our area, there's certain cells that light doesn't hit, and so therefore we're unable to see our blind spots. And so this is interesting. Okay, so let's read far on. This is so fascinating. I thought it was fascinating. So this is what our brain does. The brain fills in with surrounding detail and with information from the other eye, so the blind spot is not normally perceived. It seems incredible that our visual perception is incomplete in this way. It goes against our inner conviction that the world we perceive is coherent and complete. Do you get what's going on? Your brain is working against you. It's okay. You see, your brain and your rational mind wants coherence and completeness. And so what it does is that when it cannot see the blind spot, it purposely gets information from the eye so that it can complete it, because that's what the brain wants. The brain wants complete things. And the Bible is telling us this, is that we know things partially and imperfectly. So what's happening is that you have an actual battle in your head. Hence why the books that are being written constantly, the battle of the mind, this and that. And the Bible is interesting. This is the intriguing part. This is the fascinating part, is that our brain is not saved. Your brain is not saved. This is why the Bible in Romans 12 tells us that we need to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. So there's a constant renewing that needs to take place. So every morning we should all of us get up and get saved. This is why we struggle in our walk with God, because we do not heed that advice. And I'm the one who doesn't do it. I'm number one on that line. I know this principally. I understand the importance of me waking up and renewing my mind. What basically I'm doing is this: I have to remind my mind that I'm saved, because my mind is working against me. And this is the challenge for many of us. The reason why we can't see our blind spots is that because we believe, because our brain, that's a good one. Our brain, that's a new word, like brain. Our brain is working against us. So it's not your fault when somebody comes along and tells you about a blind spot. It's shattering. It's scary. It's I don't want to hear it. And so what we do is we reject the relationship. Think of it this way. You're driving on the highway, you're listening to your favorite worship music, or not. It's okay. You can still be a Christian, not listen to Christian music. And you're just like chilling, you know. You could be listening to reggae, whatever it is. You know, you're having a good time. You're just flying and all of a sudden you think you checked your blind spot, and you're like, oh, no, there's no one. And so you change lanes, but you decide, like, you know, you're going to give it one more glance, and then you realize, almost hit a car. How many have had that experience? I've had that experience many often. Thank God for the second glance. Because what it's doing is that your brain is actually lying to you. You think you've seen no car, but in reality, there is a car. You haven't seen completely. And this is why it's important that so what happens is this, though, is that in that moment where you actually have an encounter with the fact that you turned around to see that you didn't really see that car wasn't there, you're like, you get scared, and in that moment you have like this issue, like, I don't know if I can drive right now. Like some people go through like all kinds of issues in that moment because it is jarring. It has a jarring effect. And this is what I'm trying to tell you today, is that if you really have real transparent relationships, it will jar you. And the question I want to ask you guys this morning is, do you have those kinds of relationships, people that are willing to go there, to tell you about the very areas that you're really not aware of? The blind spot is a good metaphor that there are areas in our lives that we cannot grasp nor probe. I think we always think about this as like, oh, I can just probe myself. I know myself. I understand myself. Actually, that's a very dangerous place, because what happens to a lot of people that continually probe themselves is they get into the cycle of just self-analysis, and it's an obsession, and they never get out of it. And God's heart is this, is that you don't self-probe, because there is a part of you that you're not ever going to know outside of a relationship with Him and others. So there are things we cannot see about ourselves which others do see. So when someone gives you a feedback or a constructive criticism, how do you react? This is a question I want to ask, because I act very defensively. I have a tendency to go on the defensive mode and saying, what are you talking about? I mean, come on, that's not me, that's not true. And so then you need that friend of yours that is faithful enough to stay there and walk you through it and make you and help you see it. And there's moments, though, that this is the problem, is that your brain's working against you subconsciously. You believe that you can see it. Yeah. And so this is the thing, this is the challenge. The smarter you are, the dumber you are. Smart people are incredibly difficult to work with, because they know it all. And so what happens is, it's like that's all it is. They live here. They live in their brain, and they're rational, and they're like, I conclude, therefore, la, 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 and you're talking to them, and you're like, so what God is trying to do is He's saying, come on, get dumber. But it is, this idea that, and this is with secular humanism, this idea is that it puts man on a pedestal, and it thinks that through knowledge we can know all things. But guess what? You're not created to know all things. And so this idea, this pursuit of knowledge is actually hindering us from having a real, amazing relationship with God and each other. And the Bible is very clear. It's that it takes humility. We debase ourselves on purpose. That's the word humility means. You lower yourself so that you can actually receive from God. So we're in trouble. Our brain's working against us. Our rational intelligence is working against us. Wonder why we can't have these real transformative relationships. It's not our fault, guys, so we can all go home now and have a party. Because some people have been condemning themselves and saying, oh, man, what's wrong with me? And that's not, well, there are a few things wrong with you. It's the walls that you've built. And we're going to discuss about those walls, because I believe tonight, this morning and tonight and tomorrow, the walls are going to start coming down. So what we need in our lives are individuals that are willing to help us come into an awareness of our blind spots. When we refuse to be real in relationship, what we're actually doing is choosing to self-destruct. And this is I've noticed this, and since I'm from a different country, I am. So I've come to tell you about the Canadian culture. There are a lot of walls in this culture. I was talking to my sister just a couple of days ago, and when we first arrived in Canada, Brockville, Ontario, of all places, I had this friend. His name is Paul Armstrong. It's funny how I never forgotten his name. He probably doesn't remember me now, but he was the first friend that I had, first white friend that I ever had. And Paul and I had a very strange relationship. When we were hanging out, playing outside, riding the bikes and stuff like that, we were really close friends. And then when he was with his friends, it's as if I never knew the guy. Like I would be like, hey Paul, what's up? Well, at the time I probably had an accent, so it was, wasn't really. I didn't even know how to say what's up. Probably I'd be like, hello, how are you? And I was wondering why he was running away from me, thinking, the heck's wrong with it? But that's not how I remember it. I remember it differently. But that maybe that was not true. But can I share something really funny for you guys? I just remembered, I'm going back to my old days, but when I first came to Canada, I didn't know about this whole underarm deodorant thing, none of that stuff. And I remember, talking about blind spots, so I remember my math teacher, Mr. McRae. I never forgotten his name because he told me something I needed to hear at the time. He brought me back. He had a drinking problem too. I didn't know though, because he'd always had this flask, but at the time I was so young I didn't know. The guy was just that's how he's coping with it. I guess I don't know. But anyways, he called me one day and he said he sat me down and he said, Joe, I just want to. Well, at the time that's not what they called me, but anyways. At the time, they called me Job, actually. I've had, I won't go there. But he sat me down, and he just said, gently, carefully, but very direct. He said, Joe, you need to put underarm deodorant. And I said, I didn't know. No one told me. I was like, straight up African. I was cool. Like, I just thought. And since that day, I've always worn. So maybe the reason why I was repelling Paul Armstrong was not necessarily because I wasn't a cool guy. It was maybe the smell is just like, Joe's coming, run! People say, I can see you, they can smell me way out there. Anyways, that was a blind spot in my life. Unless I had someone come along and tell me that, I would have still probably to this day. No, I have my wife to tell me that now. She'd be like, you stink. You need to. But this is a beautiful thing. It's that. But in that relationship with Paul Armstrong, I realized that it was a surface level relationship. It wasn't a real relationship. It was a relationship that was based on what I could probably give him. And when he needed someone to play with, he was my friend. But when he was with his friends, I wasn't a friend. That's not a real, transparent, transformed relationship. It was a surface-level relationship based on meeting a person's need. And in Canada, one of the things I've noticed, especially with guys, is that we talk about sports. We talk about the weather. Some guys, because like Dan Ramdeel, they're very cool, so they talk about, fashion and style and stuff like that. But sometimes we have a real hard time getting to the heart of the issue. Do you notice that? We don't want to go deep. It's like, yo, you know what? We talk about these things there, but don't go there. Because as soon as you do that, it's silence in the room. I love hanging out. I have friends like that. All my friends have always been friends that I could go deep with because I can't handle surface level conversation. I get bored. Like, I go into entertainment mode. It's like, whatever. Like, I'm at this point, you know what? We're not going to go deep. And this is the thing, is that we, in our country, are challenged to have real transformed relationship. This is what we believe. Just because we have lots of people in our lives, that we have real transformed relationships. Being around people does not necessarily mean you're relating with people in a way that's going to move you from point A to point B. What you need in your life is people are going to tell you that your underarm stinks. And that's okay. That will preach. So the experience of suddenly becoming aware of what was formerly a blind spot is shocking and disturbing, and it's okay, guys. But this is the problem, is that because it's shocking and disturbing, what we do is we reject real relationships, and that's my point one. Many of us have a mental picture of who we are, but it's not true, and therefore you are living in deception. We use all sorts of coping mechanisms to justify it. But in reality, what we're doing is we're pursuing relationships that will help us continue to build these walls. So this is a question I want to ask you. The relationships that you have, are they building walls or are they bringing down the walls in your life? Because when the walls come down, that's when the light of heaven can come in, and that's when transformation takes place. Instead of pursuing real relationship, we seek out surface level relationships. They'll tell us what you want to hear. So the relationships that you have, are they telling you what you hear or you don't want to hear? One of the best relationships that I have, you guys know this, Pastor Sean and I go a long way. And our relationship was established in basically hearing things we don't want to hear. Well, I didn't want to hear mainly. He was telling me stuff, like he told me one time, he's like, dude, he said, you're so smart, you're dumb. I wasn't listening. Because I had all the answers. I was like, man, like, I'm cool. What are you talking about? And he's like, you're indecisive. You can't. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm indecisive. No, you're over here and you're over here. Make a decision. And what he was doing was he was helping me pinpoint the areas of hindrance, the areas that were keeping me from going where God called me to go. And so what I did is that I purposed in my heart and said, I'm not going to be that fool that's going to reject wise counsel. However difficult, I'm going to take it. What is readily and easily absorbable by others is hidden from us, and this is why we need people in our lives. Right now, I'm talking to you guys. There's parts of me that I can't see. I can't tell my facial expression. Even though my eyes are right in front of them, I can't seem to see what I'm doing right now. You guys can tell what's happening. So you guys actually can help me by telling me the truth and say, hey, you know what, you're really like, I don't know if you're happy or sad, but there's something wrong with you. And see, this is the thing, is that we think communication is just words, but it's more than words. What we're expressing in our tone and the way we carry ourselves, that's also communicating something to people. Let's read John 8:31-32 in the NLT. This is a really good passage. When you got a chance, go read it. But Jesus is basically having a fun time with the Pharisees. And anytime Jesus has an encounter with Pharisees, he says some incredibly disturbing, shocking things to them. He's saying this to them. He's like, I'm of heaven, you're from earth. You're of the devil, I'm from the Father. Like, you're the sons of the... Like, he's saying stuff they do not want to hear. I'm light, you're darkness. You don't listen. And he just... hitting them hard. And this is what's happening to them, is that it's the very thing that they want to hear, that they need to hear, but they're rejecting it. The Jews, because they could not handle the reality of who Jesus was, they not only rejected freedom, but they rejected the very person who came to save them, because they couldn't see their blind spot. And so let's read now John 31:32 in chapter 8. Jesus said to the people who believed in him, you are truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teachings, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So he was talking to the people that already knew him. These were disciples. He wasn't talking to the Pharisees at that moment. And so let's look at the word truth. What does that mean? Well, in the Greek, the truth means reality. So Jesus is actually a reality, is the truth. And the opposite of reality is what? It's virtual reality. Well, what is virtual reality? Let's define virtual reality. It's almost reality. It feels real. It looks real, but it's not reality. Truth, then, it's God's version of reality. Jesus is God's version of your reality. If you don't have God's version of your reality, then you're living in deception. Lies, therefore, are the devil's version of reality. It looks real, but it's a counterfeit. It's based on reality or the cheap imitation of the real. You guys have been probably looking at this painting thinking, man, this is really cool. Why do they have a painting on stage? Because we're a hipster church. We want to be cool. And so we thought we put a painting. No, that's not why. There's a reason behind this painting. This painting was purchased 2 years ago. And this was right after, my wife's smiling already, right after we celebrated my son's, Jade's second birthday. First birthday, sorry. I can't count. Math's never been a strength of mine. It was his first birthday, and we just celebrated. We had guests and so on have left. We cleaned up. And we're just sitting, chilling, drinking some coffee and tea, whatever. And this knock on our door, and there was this female and male that came in, and they're a Jewish student, and they were selling paintings door to door. And they gave me the most beautiful story. I mean, they talked to us about why they're selling these original work of art, and they're selling it to support artists in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, I think it was, and this is how we can support by purchasing it, and these are incredible. So they showed us all kinds of paintings, and they spent probably 2 hours showing us, and they were telling us, oh, we'll look great here, and about this. And at one point, we were so into it, I was ready to buy like a lot more, but we didn't have the finances, thank God. Thank God, because it would have been even worse. But anyways, there's a roommate of ours that was there at the time, best friends with my wife. She's like, oh, she was into it. She's one of those people that just like gets excited about everything. So her excitement also, it was the perfect atmosphere to be deceived. And so we buy this, we buy this painting, and it was very expensive. It was $400 and something. I can't. $600? It's even more expensive. Okay, I thought it was $450. Now I feel even worse. God help me. So we bought a painting for $600, and we thought it was the real thing. It wasn't framed at the time, so $600 just for the painting. And I'm thinking, this is an incredible gift that I'm buying for my wife, because my wife is a dancer, so this is what we picked up. And so this is going to be something that we're going to always remember, and it was going to be a gift for her for our anniversary. And I called this friend of mine, we were just talking, and I told him about this purchase that I made. And he's like, oh, you bought a painting? Yeah. He goes, oh my gosh. He goes, were they Jewish students and this and that? I go, yes, they were. He goes, oh no, you're in trouble. And then he sends me this image of a poster that they put in Stittsville saying, watch out for these guys because the paintings that they're selling are not real. Too late. Too late. See, we bought the counterfeit. This is a cheap imitation of the real. This thing is actually valued, I think, about $20 from China. This is where it's built. It looks beautiful, but it's not the real thing. And many of us, this is the life that we live, is that we have this reality that we think is the truth, but it's actually a cheap imitation of the truth. We're living a lie. It looks great on the outside, But to a trained eye, when they look at it, they go, that's not the truth. And so what do you do with something that's not real? You get rid of it. My wife said, I want this out of the house. And so it's interesting because we did try to sell it because the frame is worth $200. Is it $400? I don't know how much the frame is worth. It gets more expensive as she tells me this. This is worse than we paid $200 because I stopped the payment on the other $200 after I realized, oh my gosh. And the guy that was doing the framing, man, he was bold. He harassed me, asking for the next $200. I'm thinking, what are you talking about? Because I don't know anything about these guys. I'm a framer. I'm like, you're part of this whole deal. I'm like, threatening the guy, and he still was pushing for the money. Like, oh, that's what the devil does, man. You don't give in. And so, in any case, this thing we put on Kijiji, no one wants it. I guess somehow in the spirit, people know it, and then finally someone bought it, but for some reason he can't find the church. And so it's been in church for a while, and now I know the reason why, because God wanted me to use it as an illustration. So you know what? It's worth it. We spent almost $1,000, but now I feel better about myself because we used it as an illustration, and also maybe we gave it away. I gave it away to somebody yesterday. So they can have a cheap imitation of art, but it doesn't matter because they don't know. For us, it's a big problem. they don't care. Yeah, it's like, whatever. Ignorance is bliss, It's like, if I never knew, if my friend never called me, to this day, I'd be thinking I'd have an original work of art, and I'd be showing it off to people and be pretending like I'm this artist going, this was blah, 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 blah. Can I tell you a story? I was thinking about this, about coffee drinkers. I saw this thing that was really interesting, coffee connoisseurs, and they just know the difference. And Starbucks had come out with this cup of coffee for $5. Someone's checking their time thinking, like, I haven't gotten to my first point. I'm still telling the story. But we can be here till 3 o'clock. It's fine. It's hot outside. You don't want it's air conditioned here. You can hang out. But the story is this, is that so they have this $5 coffee. And so Jay Leno decided to test and see actually people can tell the difference between real $5 coffee and cheap coffee, like I think it was like worth like 50 cents, whatever. And so what he did was he would call them. And so all these hipster type guys, they would drink it and they sip and they describe and they go, I love the bitterness of it and labba-dabba-doo. They describe it all, okay? And every time these hipster type came in, they were describing the wrong coffee because both coffees were actually cheap. So they just told them one was worth $5 the other, but there was no difference between the two coffees. They're both horrible crap coffee. And so they were all like, no, this one's the best one because this and this and this. They had reasons, They would swish it. They would drink. They do all this stuff. Finally, they get this guy who's really like overweight with tattoos, does not look like a connoisseur at all of coffee. He drinks both coffees and he says they're both crap. So the point is this, is that I think we're all easily deceived. And this is what I'm thinking, is the illustration in that story is this, is that the more you know, the more likely you are to be deceived. You have to be like a child to enter the kingdom. You have to ask questions. The people who know everything will never grow. Well, that rhymed, I think. Proverbs 27:5-7, NLT says, an open rebuke is better than hidden love. Wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. A person who's full refuses honey, but even bitter food tastes sweet to the hungry. Oh, I want to be that guy. I want to be that hungry guy that I'm like, you know what, just give me whatever. It might taste bitter right now, but I'm so hungry to learn. I want to go to the next level that I'm going to just, because sometimes God will want to speak through you through your enemies. Sometimes it's the people that you think are against you that are for you. The people that are giving you the sweet kisses, they're setting you up for the fall. You ever see those American Idol contestants? Mama told them that they're great singers, but they're tone deaf. And then finally they come before Simon Cowell and they sing, and he tells them for the first time ever that they can't sing. And it's such a shocking confrontation. It's such a jarring effect on them that they just start screaming and yelling and wanting to fight Simon. And Simon is like, I'm just telling you the truth. Like, someone forgot to tell you the truth. All their lives, they've been listening. They've been, that's the lies, these sweet kisses from mom and dad and all that stuff, but they're kisses from the enemy. And so I want The wounds of a friend. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. A real friend will wound you because he'll tell you about your blind spots. And if you think you're full, guess what? You're going to even refuse honey. Isn't that interesting? And so this is the thing, is that the kingdom responds to hunger. You have to always be hungry. You have to wake up every morning and say, it was good that I had manna yesterday, but I want the fresh manna this morning. That's the revelation of God. That's what I'm learning, is that the way you go from glory to glory is this, is that you look and you celebrate what happened to the past, but you look to the future and say, I want something, because God is so massive. There's more to discover in God and each other. Psalm 141:5 in the God Word Translation says, a righteous person may strike me or correct me out of kindness. It's like lotion for my head. My head will not refuse it because my prayer is directed against evil deeds. What is the psalmist saying here? This will not hurt me, but heal me and will greatly refresh me. Anointing in Scripture was put on people so that they could be promoted for next season. When Samuel anointed David before he was ever king, he anointed him as king. And so what happened is, this is the anointing, with it comes the empowerment to do what God has called you to be. And so you have to see the corrections that you receive, the constructive criticism, when people reveal the blind spot as oil, as its anointing. It's for your promotion. It's to get you to the next place. That's the purpose of people showing you areas that you're blind to. Don't be afraid, because this is what we do. We build walls because we think it's going to hurt us. But the Word of God says, no, the anointing actually heals you. And not only this, but it'll refresh you so that you can do what God has called you to do. And it's the challenge all of us face, is this. We think that we have revelation of God's grace. And we think, oh, I know God's grace. It's the unmerited, undeserved favor of heaven. Wow, I live this. And so, but what we don't understand is that, in John 1:17 tells us, is that the law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus. What is that saying? The law basically says this. It sets a standard, and it says that, and it's such a high standard you can't meet it. So the purpose of the law is to disqualify you. The purpose of Jesus is this, is that he empowers you with grace so that you can confront your reality. And this is the challenge for all of us, is that we want the grace, but we don't want the truth. But grace and truth is in Jesus. I had a young adult years ago come to me, and he said he wants to be the next Justin Bieber. And I thought, that's great. And so I said, how are you going to do it? He said, through the grace and the divine empowerment of heaven, the religious conversation that you have. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. And so he said, yeah, I'm just going to sing some songs on YouTube, and it's going to go viral, and he's going to be famous because he's accessed grace. And he began to preach to me, and he began to tell me how little I knew of God's grace, because I started to correct him and said, that's not possible. Because what I discovered is that I asked him if he knew how to play the guitar, and he said no. And I thought that could be a problem, because if you don't even know how to play guitar, how can you be the next Justin Bieber? And he said, no, you don't get it, Joe. God's grace is going to come on me, and this is how I'm going to do it. And so many Christians live like this. And so he has this wonderful dream, but he's denying the reality of his situation. And so he creates a video, plays some songs. Obviously, he doesn't know how to play guitar. And guess what? The video didn't go viral. Nobody watched it. So he came to me, and I began to tell him, good, you got to confront your reality. You need to learn how to play music. You see, this is the thing, is that God wants to bless you, but he's not going to bless you if you're not confronting your reality. If there's areas that you're deficient, God can't come into it. If you've built walls around that area of your life, and you're like, God, I want your grace, and I just want you to do it for me. No, it's not going to happen. What God does is that God's grace is the very thing that allows you to confront your sin. God has purposely created us to need each other. When he created Adam, God knew that Adam was incomplete without Eve. Even though he had unbridled connection with God, God himself said it's not good for man to be alone. So this is what we're getting from all this stuff that we're saying. None of us are really going to come into perfection without each other, because we cannot see ourselves. I know we spend a lot of time with ourselves. I know a lot of us look in the mirror and we think we know each other, but guess what? That's deception. You don't really see the true self. We know more about ourselves than anyone else in this culture, because we've learned to, do all these self-assessment and this and this and that, and so we think that we really have an understanding. But you know what? There are business executives that are completely blind, and they're wondering why their their companies are not going in the direction that they're supposed to, or their employees are not respecting them. We are communicating all kinds of stuff. There's a tremendous amount of communication that's happening through our expression, tone, also even our emotional state. You know, sometimes when someone's talking, you know, sometimes you're like, you're doubting the person. Just the mere squint says something. Communication is way more than just words. John Gotten, a psychologist at the University of Washington who studies relationship, found that eye rolling correlates with higher divorce rates. Think about it. When was the last time you rolled your eyes when someone was talking, your husband, wife? We do that. But what it's saying is this, is that it's disconnecting because the person is trying to communicate something and we're rejecting it. And so in essence, what we're doing is actually we're creating this separation, and eventually it ends up in divorce. Contempt is the worst thing. It's the opposite of communication. We always say, well, they know I was joking. Really? Do you know they were joking? You don't know. Sometimes we are right, but we're often wrong. Number 2, we're easily deceived where there is no communication. Genesis 3:6 says this: when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. This is interesting. When you really read it, he actually wasn't with her when you read the scriptures, because the devil actually deceived Eve alone. But even if he was, let's propose that, yeah, he was right there with her. He wasn't really with her. How many of you find yourself sometimes, you're present, you're physically there, but you're not really emotionally there? You're not connected, engaged? A lot of people do this. You know, they go through the motions, but in reality, there's no connection, there's no communication that's happening. In order for communication to take place, you need to be present. And this is why so many of us have these relational deficits, because we're not where we're supposed to be. We're somewhere else. And so the key is that all the time, we need to be at that very place. And this is the key is that I've learned, is that the only way the devil could have separated Eve is because he could deceive her, was because he separated her from Adam. And it's interesting because Adam is the one that heard the commandment not to eat of that tree. I wonder how he communicated it to Eve. Because obviously when Eve was being confronted by the devil, she didn't really have the full information. If she really understood, do you think she would have been deceived? There was a lack of communication that took place. And the consequence of this is that when there is a lack of communication, we fall off the mark. That's what happens. That's when sin happens. That's when the relational deficit comes. That's when the walls start to be built. And that's when we get in trouble. 1 Peter 5:8-11 says, keep a cool head, stay alert. The devil is poised to pounce. It would like nothing better than to catch you napping. Keep your guard up. You're not the only one plunged into these hard times. It's the same with Christians all over the world. So keep a firm grip on your faith. God does not desire us to sleepwalk through life. I know many of us use many words. I'm one of those people. I use a lot of words, but we don't really communicate. I really believe the reason being is fear. There's this idea that we disqualify ourselves, and this is the byproduct of the fall. See, the definition of sin is to miss the mark, and when you miss the mark, it's not just a moral thing. There's a part of it, yeah, there's the moral part, but the moral part is the byproduct of us not feeling good. So then we create all these counterfeits to cope with our failures. But so we shouldn't be attacking the morals. What we need to attack is this feeling of not being good enough. That this feeling that if I go after somebody, they will reject me. I know that's something I've struggled with. It's like, no, I'm not going to pursue because what if they reject me? And so then what happens is we stay in our little, 4 walls, and we're in prison. We never move forward. The potential is that when you go love somebody, yes, you may potentially be rejected. But guess what? Jesus also experienced that very thing. He died for us. He gave his life, and many of us have rejected him. But he doesn't all feel sorry for himself. He continues on loving. And so instead of feeling rejected, instead of being a victim, go after people. Pursue people. Ephesians 2:14 says, for Christ himself has brought peace to us. He united Jew and Gentile into one people when in his own body on the cross, he broke down the wall of hostility that separated us. When we don't communicate, we build walls of hostility that separate us. We don't say what we mean, and we often say nothing because of fear of being misunderstood or rejected. Lack of communication, I believe, is the death of relationship. They've done a study. The number one cause of divorce is lack of communication. When we build walls, when we don't talk, guess what happens next? Disaster. Lastly, I just want you to know this. We really don't know our impact on others. We think that when we don't address the issues that we can't see, that has no effect on others. But the Bible's very clear. Romans 14:7 NLT says, "For we don't live for ourselves or die for ourselves." You have impact on others. You cannot see it because some of these impacts happen inside of you. But ultimately, they do come out, their expression, your facial expression, the way you carry yourself. And so what I'm saying to you is this, is that when you don't address your blind spot, it creates an atmosphere in your home, in your churches, and it's the very thing that's destroying you. And you don't even know it. And so this is what we need, is we need God to come into those places. We need to invite the light of God so that He can show us those areas through people. You know, there's few things that I've noticed over the years of just pastoring. I've noticed these different types of coping mechanism that we build walls on. And you're gonna see yourself in this one. And these are different types of people that I've noticed that have their blind spots in areas in relationship that they don't see. And one is the aggressive pursuer. Too fast, too quick. They seem needy. Can't seem to sustain relationship. Oh, I'm always pursuing people, Joe, but they never pursue me back. And so what happens to them is they think that, well, you know what, no one loves me. But what they haven't learned is how to do relationship healthy. That's a blind spot to them. They just think they're so needy, and people just reject them because it's like, oh, okay, you're too much, too quick, too fast. The passive-aggressive, waiting for people to come to him. Generally, they are well-liked but struggle when it comes to pursuing relationships. Blind spot, they don't utilize relationships well. I've struggled with that all my life. I've always been the guy who thought, people will come to me. And so what you see today is something that has been refined through the fire. I've had people speak into this area of my life, and I still struggle in this area in my relationship because I think like everybody should come to me. But what God has been teaching me is that there's a healthy pursuit in relationship and also in marriage, in every area. So this is an area I want to ask you, are you that passive-aggressive? Because what happens to us is when we don't get what we think we deserve, we get angry and we lash out and we build walls. The lonely. Many men struggle with this. The stoic man who's next to impossible to connect with. He has all the answers. He's critical and is generally very lonely. But he hides with work. He camouflages it with work. He's a workaholic. There's women that deal with this. So many older men deal with this. I know my father, that's an issue that he's dealt with for years. It's like, you know what? They're lonely. They have no friends. Because they think that they're sufficient in themselves. But what they need is actually others to come alongside of them. And if you're that person, well, God wants the walls to come down. The socially inept. This is the guy who just disqualifies himself right away because he's afraid of people. You've met that guy. Sits at home, plays computers all day, and hides behind technology. Or the controller. Mothers struggle with this one. The control freak, because they're so afraid of losing things. They have this Messiah complex. They really want to play God. And you see that, it's like it's the overbearing, it's like they're controlling everything. That everything has to be controlled. And this is interesting. The more you try to control things, guess what happens the more likely you're to lose them. Because what happens is people are not meant to be controlled. God doesn't control us. God gave me a word years ago, and he said this. He said, freedom has a boundary, and it's called grace. You want to control people, give them grace. The grace of God actually creates a boundary line over your life. It's the grace of God that empowers people to do the right thing, not you being overly involved. Because if you want to be God, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be overwhelmed. You're not meant to be God. Remember? And then the drama queen and king. Yeah, you run away from these guys because they always have drama. They either are creating drama or they bring drama. Or they talk about people who have drama. That's the reality. And you're constantly wondering why there's so much drama, because drama becomes their identity and their reality. And the reason being is because they don't want to address the truth of their condition, the situation. So they become addicted to drama. Do you know anybody like that? And lastly, I mean, there could be many, but the narcissist. Self-obsessed, irresponsible, does not understand the impact he has on other people's lives. It's all about him. These are the walls that we've built to cope with the relational deficits. And I believe today, God is revealing these blind spots in your life, man, I need people to speak into this.